I just want to start off by thanking you guys for always dropping an email, sending your hellos, your best wishes to me. I really appreciate that. But a lot of you guys are also sending emails of concern. You're worried about supply chain shortages. You're worried about the housing market. You're worried about whether or not your family is prepared for what's coming down the pipeline. We've got inflation. We've got a recession that, lawmakers right now, they don't quite want to admit the current state of the economy, but it is what it is. And, whether we're in a recession right now or not, your purse, your bank accounts, your wallets will pretty much dictate how you feel about the economy. So whether the economy is, quote, great, or the economy is headed for a recession or even a depression, as some people have thrown out, it is what it is, as they say. And so if you're feeling good about your financial situation, the economy is probably pretty good to you. However, if you're living paycheck to paycheck, the economy is probably, not so good for you. We know about what the Fed is doing right now. Fed Chair Jerome Powell, he is warned about their plans going forward, and they have actually followed through and executed a number of times. In fact, the Federal Reserve has executed more aggressively than we've seen historically in the past. Now, I got an email, and I actually have a friend in the banking industry, and she's fairly high up in the banking industry, and she warned me a number of different times about what would likely be happening. Now, when it comes to financial warnings, when it comes to futuristic warnings about what is likely to happen going forward, no one is 100% accurate. I don't care if you're Michael Burry, the guy who predicted The Big Short. He basically was in this movie called The Big Short. He predicted the previous housing market crash back in 2008. He made billions of dollars off this call that he made. So Michael Burry, even he is not going to be 100% accurate on future predictions. Warren Buffett's not going to be 100% accurate on future predictions. But there's certain things that we can watch and monitor and make reasonable deductions in terms of what's likely to happen going forward. Now, one of the things that the Fed is trying to address right now is obviously we've had a massive spike in food prices. We've seen huge increases in gas prices. Inflation, from a Federal Reserve standpoint, their target rate is 2%. Now, the Fed, they basically pumped out a lot of money. They pumped a lot of money into the financial system, and it ultimately created this problem that we're dealing with now with inflation. And so what it did was it lowered interest rates for homes. It made homes more affordable for potential home buyers. It made housing prices go up because as more people were able to afford homes, more people were trying to buy homes. So even renters who probably had really no intent to buy a home because they couldn't afford real estate, they were like, hey, wow, these interest rates are so low, we can afford to buy real estate now, right? So it's kind of like the exact opposite of what we're dealing with right now, which is no one can afford homes because housing prices are so high and mortgage rates are so high. But a couple of years ago, the Fed was lowering interest rates because they were afraid that the economy was just going to crash as a result of this massive shutdown that we were embarking upon. And so what this did was it saved the economy, so to speak, or depending upon your perspective, it ultimately kicked the can down the road. So what this did was it created this massive influx of buyers entering the housing market to buy a house. But there's only so many houses for sale. So as the limited inventory began to dwindle, more and more home buyers or home sellers realized, hey, let's jack this price up. Or actually, they didn't even have to jack the price up. The buyers realized how low the inventory was, so they were outbidding one another to be able to purchase a home. And so that drove up the price of real estate. But not only did that happen, the price of everything else went up. Food prices. You can't go into a Publix, a Walmart, a Costco, a BJ's wholesale club. You cannot go into a Sam's Club. You cannot go into an Aldi without seeing a drastic increase in the price of just about everything in the store. Now, obviously, supply chain shortages also further drove up the price of goods because it's simple supply and demand. And so many people were like, okay, you know, we need a stockpile. We need to purchase more goods because the price continuously goes higher. And so many families were preparing by purchasing more and more goods and stockpiling their pantries so that they can ensure that, you know, hey, the price that we pay today, this will cover us for a long period of time. Also, in case there's a food shortage, we want to make sure that you have plenty of food on hand. Well, this further drove up the price of goods. This further drove down the inventory supply. Now, the flip side to this is if you're a business owner, if you're an employee, if you're a contract employer, if you're a contractor, if you're 1099, you're going to see the flip side to it. And you've already seen the flip side to it, which is wages did not keep up with the rate of inflation. Everything went up pretty much overnight, drastically. Whether you're looking at the CPI numbers, whether you're looking at the these different economic reports that come out, the CPI, the CPE, a number of different reports, core inflation, in respect or in relation to your income, everything went higher. Everything was more and more expensive. And so then employees started saying, hey, you know, I need to make more money. So many employees realized, hey, let me throw my resume in the hat and see if I can land a higher paying job. That sparked a new trend of employees leaving the workforce. They're just employees walking off the jobs. And this is why many employers right now, if you walk into restaurants, certain establishments, you'll find that employers are basically saying, hey, we can't find employees. We can't hire enough help. And so you're going into these different businesses and you're probably getting subpar service, or there's not enough people walking around, you know, waiting to help you. And this is because basically employers can't afford how much employees are looking for in terms of income now, because everything has gone so much higher in terms of expense. Employers have to pay so much more money to be able to retain an employee. Now, what does that do? This forces the employer to have to raise their prices to offset the cost of the employees' higher salaries, higher hourly rates. And so this cycle continues, and it continues. Everything gets more expensive. Employees need more money. Employers have to pay more money. Then employers have to raise their prices. Everything gets more expensive. Then again, employees need more money because everything, you know, continues to go higher. So the Fed now is attempting to break this cycle. And so what they're doing is what they call quantitative tightening. And so they're raising interest rates at a historically aggressive rate. And with that, many people are going to experience a lot of pain in the process. And it's rather unfortunate, but it is what it is. And this is the warning that has come from Fed Chair Jerome Powell. And if you think about it, if we're not preparing now, it'll be even more painful. And so I'm not trying to spread doom and gloom or anything like that. This is more along the lines of, you know, my own personal warning to my, you know, my YouTube family here, to you guys. Hey guys, this is coming down the pipeline. So unfortunately, the Fed can't just lower the price of gas. The Fed can't just lower the price of food at the grocery stores. The Fed can't just go out and tell all the homeowners to lower the price of their home so that housing can become more affordable. And so what the Fed can do is, the Fed has a number of different tools. One of the most popular tool that they have is their ability to manipulate the federal interest rates. And essentially, it's kind of like the rate that banks are charged to borrow money. This also impacts the 10-year Treasury yield. Now, going forward, before I talk about going forward, the Fed's manipulation of the interest rate inevitably would lower inflation. But the problem is that there's going to be a lot of other things that get altered or harmed along the way. It's kind of like having one big hammer. You have one little nail you're trying to like nail down, but you got this massive hammer that's like the size of a house. And so you're trying to just bang this one nail, because as you walk past, I don't know, this is probably a bad analogy, but imagine you're walking through your house and your sock got caught on the floor because it's like a nail sticking up in the floor, and you just want to bang that little sucker down so it doesn't tear up all your socks or even cut your foot. But the only thing you have is this massive hammer, and this hammer is about the size of your house. And so you almost destroy the house trying to bang this nail into the floor so that you don't ruin your socks. And this is almost kind of like what the Fed is doing right now. The Fed is trying to address inflation. But in order for the Fed to address inflation, they're pretty much destroying everything in the process. Apparently, they don't have a smaller hammer. So we got a warning recently, and it came from J.P. Morgan. If you guys are familiar with this particular bank, I'm sure a lot of you guys bank here, Chase. So J.P. Morgan Chase, the CEO of J.P. Morgan Chase, warned that the United States is headed toward something even worse than a recession. Now, the first thing that comes to mind is a depression. Now, we're going to talk about that, but the key here is this is not to spread doom and gloom. This is not to cause panic or fear. This is purely for awareness. Now, economists have been warning, about an impending recession for months. Now, regardless of whether or not the current administration wants to admit that we're in a recession or not, I mean, they effectively redefine what a recession is. So according to them, we're not in a recession, but, again, it is what it is. Now, one particular major financial player thinks that things may end up being a lot worse than a lot of people are anticipating. Now, let's not forget about the railroad strike that was impending. We pretty much dodged that bullet, so to speak. However, there's a lot of the details related to that railroad strike that are still up in the air, and there is a tentative agreement in place that I'm not even aware of all parties having signed off on. So I don't even know if we can really rely on this tentative railroad strike agreement with the union workers. There's a lot more to that. Now, I want you guys to pay very, very close attention to dates. So 2 dates that are very important right now is, I believe it's the FOMC meeting that the Fed will hold, and this will be September 20th, or I think it's September 20th or September 21st. Pay attention to that date, because that will be the date that the Federal Reserve will have their FOMC meeting, and generally speaking, Fed Chair Jerome Powell will pretty much give a recap of what was discussed during the meeting, and at that point, they will likely indicate when or how much interest rates will be going up. Now, some people have suggested that, okay, the Fed's they're gonna basically cave and they're gonna pivot. But I don't think this is going to happen. I think that the Fed will continue to press forward because they have to address inflation. Core CPI numbers came out recently, and inflation was 8.3%, which is even farther. It was higher than what many analysts were anticipating, and even higher than what the Fed was anticipating. So even with the aggressive multiple 75 basis point rate hikes, inflation is still running ahead of where the Fed is comfortable. So based on that alone, I really don't see the Fed letting off the gas anytime soon. Now, for months, economic experts, they've been pretty much sounding warnings about an upcoming recession, but the Federal Reserve they've been quite aggressive with their interest rate hikes this year in an effort to slow down the pace of inflation. But remember, the Fed's goal is to make borrowing expensive enough that the consumers, the spending starts to decline. And so when the spending starts to decline, the demand of products declines. When demand of products decline, theoretically, the prices come down. We're talking about prices for possibly automobiles, the prices of food at the grocery stores, the price of gas, the price of housing. All of these items theoretically should come down as interest rates increase. But there's always the unintended consequences that come with these massive decisions and these huge financial actions. So I want you guys to be aware of what's happening. Now, keep in mind, the CEO of J.P. Morgan Chase, he's been right about a number of different predictions in the past. Now, much like Michael Burry, no one is 100% accurate in their predictions. And of course, the further out you try to predict, the less likely you'll be right about your predictions. But if I were to ask you, hey, it's kind of like if I were to say, hey, what do you think the weather's going to be like tomorrow? You could probably pick up your phone, look at your weather app, and you'll probably have a fairly accurate prediction of what the weather's going to be like tomorrow. But then if I said, hey, what's the weather going to be like 7 days from now? 7 days from now, you can still look at your weather app, but it's probably not quite as accurate as it would be for tomorrow's weather forecast. Then if I said, hey, what's the weather going to be like on this day 6 months from now or 12 months from now? Now it's almost a complete crapshoot. And maybe you look at some historical averages and, figure out, okay, well, usually around this time of year is pretty nice. So you might throw out a guesstimate at that point. But the accuracy of that prediction, it clearly gets less and less accurate the further out you attempt to predict. Now, I want you guys to keep in mind the direction of the economy. It's going to get a lot more painful for most people going forward before it gets better. Now, the Fed, they're taking a risk. Now, if it raises interest rates too drastically, it could possibly lead to major pullbacks in consumer spending, and this could in turn fuel a recession, which may be far greater and far more painful than many people have predicted. Now, going forward, the ultimate silver lining in all of this is that, so far we've had a solid labor market. I mean, if we look at the unemployment rates, I think it's like 3.7% unemployment. That's fairly good. Now, your economic situation, how unemployment rates are in your local economy, it may vary. Unemployment can be higher or lower in certain cities. And so, for example, it may be 10% in one city, but it may only be like 2% in another city. So it really depends on what your local economy is like. Kind of like the housing market. Like some housing markets may crash, other housing markets might be, doing okay. Now, Jamie Dimon, he is the CEO of JP Morgan Chase, and he pretty much acknowledges that the United States economy is strong right now, and he's still convinced that conditions are still headed for deterioration. And he also said that there's like a 20 to 30% chance of facing something much worse than a recession in the near term. Now, in economic terms, when we think about, well, what the heck is worse than a recession, we tend to imagine a full-blown depression, a really prolonged period of economic decline. But Dimon is actually saying that he's convinced that we're headed in this direction, but he does think that there's a possibility that, it may not be quite as bad as a depression, but it will get worse. So we need to start thinking about secondary action plans, plan B, plan C, plan D. You need to look at your balance sheets. You need to look at your household balance sheets. You need to look at your economic employment strength, meaning how likely do you think that you are to be let go of your job? Is your job at risk? Think about it. Is your company still hiring? Was your company hiring and did they stop? Are they letting people go? Are you a top performer at your company? Are you a lower performer at your company? So, I'm just thinking ahead because I want my family to be prepared. When I say my family, I'm talking about my YouTube family here. So also think about your balance sheet. Think about how much debt you carry. Think about your monthly expenses. How much does it cost for you to live month to month? Are you living paycheck to paycheck? Do you have any wiggle room with your budget? What can be eliminated from your budget? What can be eliminated from your monthly expenses that can then free up cash, that can then free up capital that can be reallocated toward socking away money for savings? Now, of course, none of this is financial advice, but I'm just thinking out loud. Like, if I'm trying to prepare for financial collapse, if I'm trying to prepare for whatever is happening economically, I need to be thinking about all of these important critical details. And I mentioned this in a previous video that, the game of money is kind of like Monopoly. It's kind of like Uno. So with Uno, you start the game off with, like 8 cards or something like that. And you have all these different players that are around the table. Now, some people just play the game for fun, but then other people play the game more strategically. And so sometimes it doesn't make sense to put all of your cards down at one time. So the game of money works very similarly. Sometimes it doesn't make sense to pay everything down as soon as you have available cash. Sometimes you'll find yourself in situations where, depending upon the type of debt and the terms of the debt, whether it's a credit card, Visa, MasterCard, American Express, depending upon the interest rate, the terms of the credit card that you have, how much credit card debt balance you have. Do you have a 0% interest rate? Do you have a 20% interest rate? Do you have a fixed rate on your credit card? A lot of people don't realize that there's a lot of things that can be negotiated with credit cards. In fact, heck, I've negotiated long-term 0% interest rates on my credit cards, even though they didn't even offer it. I've also, which allowed me to roll high interest credit card debt into the lower interest credit card so that I could get out of debt even faster. Some people do not realize that there are a number of different ways to pull cash out of a 401k in order to make ends meet without having to take a early withdrawal penalty. So this is just like two different things, but there's probably hundreds of different financial strategies that a lot of people are not aware of, but they need to really educate themselves so that they can better prepare themselves and their families for what is to come. But anyway, guys, I just wanted to share this quick update with you guys. Whenever you get a warning from a high-level banking CEO, warning of something worse than a recession, you got to take it seriously. And we're heading into, Q4, which is arguably the most lucrative time of year for, at least from the retail standpoint, for retail businesses to be able to earn money, to be able to generate money, to be able to boost their revenue and their profits for the year. And as the Fed is increasing interest rates, more and more families are having less and less money to spend. And so this could lead to potentially more layoffs. It could lead to more companies pulling out early because they don't feel like, the consumer is going to come through and buy goods. More and more people could be literally axed overnight. And the last thing that you want to do is be in a situation where you don't have at least 3, 4, 5, 6 months of expenses socked away just in case. Ideally, you want to have at least a year of expenses set aside. This is not financial advice, but I'm just saying, if you lost your job, you don't want to have to worry about what bills are not going to be paid tomorrow. You want to know, hey, I've got at least several months before we have to panic. And really, we should never panic. Panicking never helps anything. But I think you guys understand what I'm saying. So it's all about preparation. I just wanted to share this quick update with you guys. If you guys have any comments for me, questions for me, drop me some comments down below, and I'll see you on the next one.